And before we take testimony with the opposition, I want to remind you of two things. What is not in the legislation is the repeal of the death penalty, or whether or not we have a death penalty. That is the law of this state. And what is not before this committee is the public records exception. That is a debate for a committee, I believe, tomorrow in House and Governmental. So I would ask the opponents to keep their testimony to the bill that's before us. Bishop?
I'm not sure how to address my concerns, but I will simply say that, you can tell me if I'm out of order here. I would be, along with the bishops of the Louisiana, would not want to increase, or would not want to. You got me off guard because I'm trying to decide how to say this.
Go. I'm not going to stop you from your testimony, Bishop. It's
Okay,
3
all right.
minutes.
Well, obviously, first of all, I should say this, the testimony is striking that I just heard. I have 40 years of priest, 30 years of priest, 15 years of bishop. I have sat with many people in those situations. Not as many, 2 or 3 similar ones, and many times of death and tragedy. And I know the deep pain and hurt. But we as a bishops' conference continue to say that we need to respect in all ways the dignity of a human person. Some of the language we use sometimes is to make someone less than human. And at times, they act that way, it seems. But our actions are not meant to be given to respond at their level, but to respond the way in which we bring true justice. And justice can be had, in a sense, by protecting us from crimes. And so I'm against enhancing or looking for alternative ways to execute, because I believe that we can, through incarceration, protect our people. One thing let me just say this at the end. When we talk about the mercy of God, some people will always tell me, well, God has justice. Mercy of God always sees in every person, even those who have done heinous crimes, sees the mark of his very image in them. And his justice, well, I don't presume what his justice is. I don't know what that is. And so I think that falls to God to make that decision. And so I would be against providing opportunities for the death penalty to continue. Now, I know that's not the law, but I would voice an opinion against that, because I think we're lessened by that process. And so I guess I'll say that for now, because I just feel as though we're continuing a cycle of violence. And at some point, it has to stop, and we start acting in a way that respects human life without demonizing it. But today, you got me flustered because of your anyway. But anyway, I just wanted to say that I know that people struggle with this issue, and I think rightly so. Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Bishop Duca. What I would say is, whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. That was 57 years of my teaching by the Catholic Church. But I appreciate that you and the church, your position on that doctrine has changed. It's just hard for me, having learned that for 57 years. But I appreciate your position, and thank you for your testimony. Do any members have any questions of Bishop Duca? Thank you.
Mr. Costanza, welcome. Please
Good morning,
introduce yourself
Chairman
for the
Bolio
committee.
and committee members. My name is Tom Costanza with the Louisiana Council of Catholic Bishops, and certainly our restorative justice concepts are victim-centered. Pray for prayer and healing across the state. We have Mass for victims and survivors of violence. Every bishop in the state has personal experience counseling with people, so certainly our church's tradition and practice is to stand with the victims. Just briefly, through the lens of Catholic social teaching related to the specifics of the secrecy side of it, I said, well, the principal secretary would say, go talk to the people that are doing it. So I went and talked to a compound pharmacist. And his first comment was, well, I'm not doing that. It was more of a moral side. It wasn't anything about afraid of. And then the second thing was, if you don't have to report to the pharmacy board, they still have to report to the feds. Now, I know this has been in Georgia. I was just trying to, how am I going to do this testimony? It got challenged in Georgia, and it won. So there may be ways that would protect that pharmacist, that compound pharmacist, who by law has to, if he doesn't have to report to the state, he must report to the feds. So I'm not enough legal side of that. And then in terms of, so that's so subsidiarity, why is it just because they're afraid of being exposed, or is there a moral, deeper reality? And I don't know the total question of that. It would be good to, there are only about 50 compound pharmacists in the state. Maybe ask them. And I know the bill will pass. I'm just bringing up the moral dimensions of it. And the other thing would be the common good. So the other comment, the compound pharmacist says, well, listen, that's a controlled substance. That's a lethal substance. That's a dangerous substance. The public needs to know where that thing is at every point in time. That's a lethal, whatever the components are. So just from those two principles of Catholic social teaching, we offer that for your consideration. Ask your local pharmacist about it, and just and see what they say. And so I call them deeper moral dimension, not so much the afraid of being exposed. I think there is a deeper moral dimension, especially this is a life and death decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costanza, and I've enjoyed all of our visits together, and so thank you for there are no questions for you. We appreciate you being with us.
Mr. Costanza.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and thank you, committee members. My name is Tom Costanza, Executive Director of the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. Certainly, the Catholic Church teaching is solid, that life is sacred from conception to natural death. That would be abortion, euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, and the death penalty. And certainly, in terms of the victims, the church is trying to support the victims. I mean, victims certainly in their own personal conscience, some will say, well, the death penalty is justice for them. And some victims will say, no, that I want mercy. It's a real situation, and it's real feeling. So we want to acknowledge that from the start. What I want to talk a little bit about, though, is I've been working with this pharmacy issue. So apparently, this legislation somehow, one principle of Catholic social teaching is subsidiarity. Like, go to the closest, like, go talk to your pharmacist. So apparently, the pharmacy board has oversight, but I'm not quite sure that there'll be oversight from this with this legislation. We have a pharmacy board to provide the best oversight of the lethal injection. And so there seems to be some way to not include them. So I was at Xavier with Dr. Norman Francis, 92 years old, and talked to the dean of pharmacy school there. I said, well, Tom, we have a policy board at Xavier and a policy board at the pharmacy school. We meet. And I said, well, wouldn't that be good for the legislature to consult with them? They're training the future pharmacists. Maybe they have some insights that could help us. And I asked a personal pharmacist. Some pharmacists said, well, even if the state doesn't require me to report to the state board, I have to report to the federal feds. So I just want to talk about that in general. In Texas, the pharmacists refuse to give the drug to Texas, so they're using 3-year-old phenobarbital. You talk to a chemist, phenobarbital loses some of its potency, and you might be using 70% of its potency. So all that just to say, could we not make sure that we have the best controls if that's going to happen? And the other thing is nitrogen gas. Air gas is the largest U.S. distributor in the United States. This is what they said. Notwithstanding the philosophical and intellectual debate of the death penalty itself, supplying nitrogen for the purpose of human execution is not consistent with our company values. They refuse to give it to Alabama. I just point out those things in all just sincerity, understanding the victim's tragedy. If this is going to happen, I think what's happening in the community, these pharmacists have ethical codes. They're not going to violate that. Companies are saying this is not good either. So I would just, as you think about this, think about the implications of how, in the medical community and the business community, how they view this. I'm sure you'll probably find a way, but certainly that's something the Catholic Church is opposed to. But if we're going to talk about means, I just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costanza, for your testimony.